Thanks for taking the time to download this BBC Radio 5 Live podcast. To find other programmes you might be interested in, click bbc.co.uk/5live, where you'll also find our terms of use.
Hello, I'm Adrian Goldberg. Thank you for downloading the 5 Live Investigates podcast. This week, a show that got a tremendous reaction from listeners when we broadcast live, as we heard claims from teachers that children are being forced into taking drugs they don't need so that their parents can claim benefits. And also, Virgin on the ridiculous. The rail company pursuing a family for almost £6,000 for a train journey from Coventry to London.
On DAB Digital Radio, digital TV, downloads and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
5 Live Investigates with Adrian Goldberg.
Hello, I'm Adrian Goldberg. Tonight on 5 Live Investigates, the school children being prescribed powerful drugs which their head teachers say they don't need. The youngsters concerned have been diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But teachers have been telling us that in some cases the system is being abused by parents who push to have their children treated with drugs like Ritalin because it allows them to claim benefits. And there are concerns that doctors are too willing to hand out the meds before carrying out proper assessments. Our reporter Mukul Devachand has been investigating. Mukul, good evening to you. Let's have a quick primer on what ADHD is.
Well, as you say, it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The symptoms include things like restlessness, a short attention span, an inability to concentrate, and a capacity for impulsive behaviour. So it's a tricky one, and Adrian, I know you're a dad, so you might be thinking, what kid doesn't have it?
Well, I do know exactly what you mean, and I guess because all kids are prone to get fidgety or bored easily, that doctors would sometimes have difficulty in assessing ADHD.
They do, that's right. But it is important to stress that this is a medically recognised condition, and the symptoms can get really severe. One parent support group told me that a child with ADHD could, and I quote, regularly rip their clothes apart, damage furniture, punch holes in doors, render most electrical devices in the home completely useless, or set fires regularly indoors.
And this, I guess, is where the drugs come in, yeah?
That's right. It's serious stuff, and around 500,000 prescriptions are written each year for things like dexamphetamine or methylphenidate, which is better known to the world as Ritalin. Now, they've been scientifically evaluated for children with severe cases of ADHD. These drugs really do work. We've had emails in tonight already from parents telling us just how helpful they've been for their kids.
I'm sure. Now, Mukul, it does sound a bit extreme to suggest, though, that some parents want their children to be given drugs just so they can claim benefits.
It does, Adrian, but I've been speaking to head teachers of primary and secondary schools in different areas of the country, and they've been telling me that some parents are, in their words, desperate to find a solution for troubled youngsters, and they think this is exactly what's happening. A diagnosis of ADHD increases your chances of getting disability living allowance and tax credits. Here's one teacher who, like the others I spoke to, spoke on condition that we didn't use their name because they didn't want to stigmatise kids in their school who do have ADHD. We've also got an actor to voice their words.
Every child that I've got on medication, we are asked to fill part of the forms that they make as benefits claimants to verify that they have ADHD. So it almost goes hand in hand.
So every single child that you have who has ADHD is from a family that's also using that to claim disability living allowance?
Yes. I think parents are very well aware of how the system works in terms of obtaining the drugs for their children and the monetary gains that they get through a diagnosis, and in some cases may well use that to obtain it.
So even when they go and visit a psychiatrist, you think that they know what they're doing?
They know what they're doing. I've got to say yes.
And Mukul, I know you've spoken to a number of teachers and medical professionals making the same claims. We've had a lot of reaction as well throughout the day to our article about this subject on the BBC News website. Even more people have contacted us through that to say this is going on.
That's right. We've had a lot of emails today. Fred in Warwickshire wrote to us, I currently work within a busy frontline welfare benefit service, and more children are being awarded disability living allowance as they're supposed to have ADHD. He's been working within welfare benefits for 13 years, and people have worked out that if their child can get DLA, they can claim carer's allowance and therefore remain on income support. So thumbs up, says Fred, for bringing this to public attention. Evelyn wrote in and she says, I work with families and agree entirely with the fact that many parents seek diagnosis in order to claim both disability living allowance and carer's allowance also. I used to work as part of a specialist ADHD team in child and adolescent mental health services, and I've witnessed this on numerous occasions. And also, on top of those two, Dee and Tayside have said, I have worked with children with ADHD. On several occasions, I've been asked and refused to complete disability living allowance forms exaggerating disabilities to increase financial income, which resulted in one parent giving an abusive phone call and withdrawing his child from school for some days. But Dee also says, please remember that there are parents who truly rely on these benefits to provide extra care for their severely disabled children and their families as well.
Well, what sort of money can you get?
Now, having a diagnosis doesn't guarantee that your claim for DLA will be successful, but if it is, you can get up to £130 a week plus tax credits. I'm told that for most parents with an ADHD child, the average is nearer £40 a week.
But still clearly well worth having. What is that money actually for?
It's for help with and support for a child with this condition. For example, taxis to go to hospital appointments, or to compensate you for the fact that you might be up all night with this child and you might not be able to work as a consequence. The downside, though, is that it provides an incentive in the system to get your children diagnosed with ADHD. And according to the heads I spoke to, that can lead to children taking drugs who don't need them. Again, this is read by an actress.
Some parents will exaggerate what exactly is happening at home, particularly in terms of aggressive behaviour, violent behaviour, breaking up furniture and so on, in order to get a care allowance, maybe a 24-hour care allowance. And they will come into school and insist that their behaviour in school is inappropriate when perhaps we don't think it is. See, I think we've got a system for young people who are diagnosed with ADHD which gives them and their parents access to medication and to additional funding to help them in their home. And that's benefits, and that works. However, I think in the absence of any other kind of therapeutic support or any other diagnosis or a greater understanding of what's going on out there, I think there are students on the edge of that who may have behavioural difficulties, who are very quickly being diagnosed, caught up in the entire system for students with ADHD. And they're ending up on medication and ending up in a system which actually they should never have been in.
So that is a very disturbing and powerful piece of evidence, Muckle. What does the government have to say about all this?
Well, we spoke to the Department for Work and Pensions. They say they're consulting on reform, and they admit that it's not right that a benefit set up to improve lives could be having the opposite impact. OK, well,
let's get a word with Dave TRAXSON. Dave is a senior educational psychologist from the West Midlands who believes that these drugs are sometimes misprescribed, and Professor Chris Hollis of Nottingham University and Queen's Medical Centre, a practising child psychiatrist who helped to draft the current NICE guidelines. Good evening to you, Professor Hollis. How are you?
Good evening, Adrian.
Yeah, what are the dangers of children taking drugs to treat ADHD who don't actually have the condition?
Well, I think we need to put this into context, because the evidence actually that the condition is overdiagnosed and children are inappropriately receiving the medication is really very thin indeed. In fact,
Well, I have to say it's quite powerful, both from the head teachers that we've spoken to in the preparation of this programme, and indeed I have to say from the vast number of texts and emails that we've received to the programme today supporting our story.
Right. I'm really drawing on evidence of large-scale research studies carried out over the last 5 years in the UK, looking at the diagnosis and the accuracy of diagnosis of ADHD, which is when the NICE guidelines are applied and diagnosis is made carefully and systematically, particularly including input from teachers and schools into that process, then it's extremely accurate. And the issue is perhaps more one of underdiagnosis than overdiagnosis.
Well, you're talking
in the
about
UK.
research, long-term study. I mean, this could just be the latest scam that people have got word of. I noticed that in just 2 years, between 2007 and 2009, the number of prescriptions for 16 to 18-year-olds for these kind of drugs, for that group alone, rose by 51%. How do you account for that?
Well, the issue there, Adrian, is that not majority of those young people had a diagnosis, but were either dropping out of treatment or were not being treated. The recognition of ADHD persisting into young adult life has really only been made in the last 5 to 10 years. And these
Muckle's got a point here. Go on, Muckle.
Professor Hollis, could it be that what might be happening is that because of the lack of communication between teachers and because of the way the system is, the wrong people are being diagnosed, that some people may not be being diagnosed, but yet the wrong people may be being diagnosed?
Well, this is certainly a possibility, but I can only draw on the evidence that we have rather than just a few anecdotal reports.
Yeah, well, I'd like you to reflect on the
that I think
the evidence that we have, Professor
Yeah.
Hollis. We'll come back to you in a moment, and we'll talk about those nice guidelines that you've mentioned. I want to bring in Dave TRAXSON, who, as I say, is a senior educational psychologist in the West Midlands. Dave, from the evidence that we have, it seems that parents are desperate to get their children, in some cases, diagnosed as ADHD.
Well, I'm certainly reassured by the responses you've had to your programme, and that fits nicely with the information I get from colleagues all over the West Midlands. And those colleagues are psychologists, head teachers, social workers, and that fits very nicely with that picture. And one of the problems with Dr. Hollis's argument is the point about triangulation of data, that there are three sides to a triangle: the doctor, the parent and the school. And in over half the cases, we reckon, in the West Midlands, when we do surveys on this, the school is not contacted, so they do not have a checklist to fill in. So Professor Stephen Rose, the eminent professor, argues that these assessments are too reliant on one side, which is the parent information.
Well, we'll come back to that very shortly. I think you're making a very important point there, Dave. But are you saying then that the evidence that we've compiled suggesting that parents are keen sometimes to get their children prescribed very powerful drugs in order to claim benefits, in your view, that is justified?
I mean, I don't want to get into the blame game for parents, because there are some very disadvantaged parents that claim benefits, and sometimes they are very correctly provided. When I do straw polls with my colleagues around the West Midlands, the figure that we come up with consistently is that in about 20% of the prescriptions, we accept that those are valid and accurate diagnoses of ADHD because they've used all three sides of the data. But in the other 80%, a lot of my colleagues all over the country, not just the West Midlands, because I've spoken at 2 national conferences recently, colleagues all over the country have major concerns about the appropriateness, especially in relation to the use of some very questionable checklists.
OK, well, we'll get Professor Hollis to comment on that before too long. Dave TRAXSON and Professor Hollis, thank you both very much indeed. And of course, here on 5 Live Investigates, as always, we're keen to hear about your experiences of ADHD. Are doctors too willing to prescribe mood-altering drugs to children, or are parents who try to help